education is key. And that's why when Dan died, our first thought really was, I knew that I needed to have known more, and I knew that Dan needed to have known more. My parents are in their late 80s and they still get such joy from learning something new, even if it's only from Pointless. Our vision is that all young people have access to really effective, evidence-based drug education. And so that's why we started the charity, because we realised that Dan wasn't alone in that. The schools were really struggling to do drug education well or at all.
Welcome to the Qualified Tutor podcast. I'm your host, Ludo Miller, and I'll be interviewing tutors and thought leaders from across the tutoring landscape to inspire, inform, and motivate you to become the best tutor you can be. The Qualified Tutor community is a safe and supportive space for tutors who love to learn and grow. We offer training, resources, ideas, and a chance to connect with like-minded tutors. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes. Welcome to this episode of the Qualified Tutor podcast. This is, I believe, the 73rd episode of this podcast, and those numbers continue to astound and surprise and excite me. So my name is Ludo Miller. I'm the host of the Qualified Tutor podcast, and today we are welcoming on Fiona Spargo-Mabbs. So as a brief introduction to Fiona, we are going to be hearing a great deal about Fiona's unique journey and what it has taught her about the relationship an educator, a teacher, a tutor can have with a student, as well as the impact this relationship can have on children's decisions about drugs and alcohol specifically. Now, this perspective is not one we've really kind of looked at before on the Qualified Tutor podcast. So I'm very excited to hear where this discussion takes us. Fiona is the mother of Dan Spargo-Mabbs, who died in 2014 from a lethal amount of the drug MDMA. And since that day, Fiona and her family and her team have worked very hard to change perceptions of the danger of drugs and alcohol in young people. The Daniel Spargo-Mabbs Foundation was set up that year in 2014 to support and to educate young people and those around them to understand the potent substances, drugs and alcohol. And today they deliver workshops, plan resources and curricula as part of the PSHE program in schools, train teachers, and also run the Youth Ambassador program to promote peer-to-peer learning and community within students. And Fiona is the director and founder of this foundation. Fiona has also, before you've heard enough of my voice, and before I introduce Fiona properly, Fiona has also recently released a book titled I Wish I'd Known. Now, you can perhaps already guess the topic of this book, I Wish I'd Known, and we'll be exploring this a little bit more kind of later on. As ever, the links to the foundation and the book can be found in the show notes below. So without further ado, Fiona, welcome to the QT podcast.
Hi, thank you for inviting me in.
Thank you very much for joining us. This is being recorded on Tuesday, the 3rd of August, just as it seems the whole world is beginning to take some holiday, take some time off, which is a great thing to see and a great chance for people to kind of decompress and relax. So thank you for taking the time, Fiona, to join us. Now, our first question, as listeners will know, is this. What is your why as an educator, Fiona?
So I've been working in education for more than 20 years, actually. I mean, the charity is more of a recent venture, but I've been an English teacher working in adult education for many years before we started the charity. And I just believe that education is the way that people can find fulfillment and freedom and empowerment, and also joy. We're hardwired as humans, aren't we, to learn? We can't help ourselves. My parents are in their late 80s and they still get such joy from learning something new. even if it's only from Pointless. But educators kind of enable people to sort of channel and focus that. My specialism within adult education was family learning, and specifically family literacy, and that was all about it's working with very vulnerable families and working in some of the most deprived parts of the borough. I'm based in South London in Croydon, and that is all about the kind of transformational power of education within a family unit and within communities. It's all about working with parents who've got limited skills in English and maths themselves, and whose children are underachieving, at risk of underachieving, and kind of breaking that cycle of underachievement, and resting on that. What I was always passionate about adult literacy for was that kind of empowering the dynamic that it can open the doors that poor literacy skills close, and the negative outcomes that can be waiting for people. It can transform lives, it can transform communities. You can see it around the world. Just being able to read and write well is just incredibly, so I'm saying empowering far too often, but education is key. And that's why when Dan died, our first thought really was, I knew that I needed to have known more, and I knew that Dan needed to have known more. And I guess maybe that's because I am an educator, but I know that if I had known more and if he had known more, he would have come to that moment of decision better armed than he was. And he would have stood a much greater chance of getting to come home safely. And so that's why we started the charity, because we realised that Dan wasn't alone in that. Schools were really struggling to do drug education well or at all, under enormous pressures of budgets and timetables and so on. But also there was just a huge lack of resources and support available for schools. And we realised, because Dan was Dan and just not someone who would have been on anybody's radar really to come to harm from drugs, we realised that any young person was vulnerable to making a bad decision, to making a series of bad decisions about something which has become increasingly available, accessible and affordable and kind of normalised for many young people. So that's what we do and why we do it, and why I believe education is key fundamentally, but why I believe that education is absolutely vital in supporting young people to make safer choices about drugs, which is what we're all about.
Yeah, so could you go into that a little bit further? There is an incredibly moving and powerful story behind what you do. So if you could tell our listeners what does the DSM Foundation hope to achieve? What is your goal as a foundation?
So the goal, that's our tagline: supporting young people to make safer choices about drugs, and it is just all about that. It's about giving young people all the information and also kind of inner resources and outer resources to manage those decision-making situations safely. It was Dan that made us realise that this was so incredibly important. And I guess a lot of what lay behind it, certainly to start off with, but I guess still does, is my book is called What I Wish I'd Known, but a lot of it is what I wish Dan could have known, and the education I wish he could have had, and the information I wish he could have had. Our vision is that all young people have access to really effective evidence-based drug education, and all the adults that influence their lives as well, so their parents and their teachers and their tutors, but all those key influences that are spending time with them, and their people that are around supporting them. We just don't want any young person ever to have to face a decision about drugs without having all the information and understanding and life skills they need to be able to make that choice safely. And so we do that in lots and lots of different ways. We deliver workshops to young people directly in schools. We've got a whole suite of planning and resources for teachers to deliver drug education in PSHE at schools in lessons from year 6 all the way through to the end of sixth form. We train teachers and all sorts of other professionals that work with young people. We do lots of working with parents is really important. Obviously, my professional background is working with parents, but also as a parent for whom it all went horribly wrong, parents are really key. We've got a youth ambassadors program, which you mentioned at the beginning, and we also commissioned a play. So we use drama as well, because drama can be such a powerful way of communicating a message to young people. So we commissioned a play by this incredible playwright Mark Wheeler, who Dan has studied his plays at school. Actually, Dan loved drama and he loved his drama teacher. His drama teacher loved him and became one of our first trustees. So it's her idea. But it's a verbatim play. So all the words in the play are the words of Dan's family and friends. And that was published by Bloomsbury. It's on the Methuen Drama list. Back in 2017. So that has been studied and performed and taught like literally around the world. In before COVID hit, it was in Australia and New Zealand and Canada. But we also commissioned Mark to adapt it to tour. So we've got a shorter version, which is adapted for a touring company of 4 actors. So we've as a charity, we funded a theatre and education tour of schools. So there's a performance and then there's a workshop afterwards, a drugs education workshop afterwards. So that's obviously we haven't been able to live tour that this year. We just managed to get one in. We do it in spring term, so we just managed to get most of it in before COVID hit last year. But we have had a film made, so we're able to have get some funding to have a film made of production. So there's been a virtual tour this year. But really exciting about the play is that's going to become a GCSE drama set text from September next year, which is amazing. So not only is it, I mean, we commissioned it obviously with the drug education message in mind, but it also happens to be a really, really good play. So it's up there with Shakespeare and whoever else is Malory Blackman and Benjamin Zephaniah and all sorts. So that's what it's all about. And I'm involved in a number of quite kind of strategic projects as well. For example, doing a lot of work around the risks of young people's exposure to drugs and social media. I'm chairing quite a high level working group that's working with Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, National Police Chiefs Council, Home Office, other charities working in the online safety space. We've just had on a national drug education conference, and we're always developing kind of new ideas and new projects. So, but I could talk forever.
Yeah, that's a pretty good run summary of what the DSM Foundation does. So, there's and hopes to achieve. So there's an amazing amount of work being done there.
To join the growing number of qualified tutors, enrol now for the Level 3 qualification for tutors. This 8-week online facilitated course covers the roles and responsibilities involved in teaching and learning, with a particular focus on inclusion, assessment, and feedback. Upon completion, you'll be awarded a Level 3 in education and training from Ofqual recognised training provider Highfield Qualifications. You will also gain a Qualified Tutor Quality Mark, the independent quality mark for tutors. Whatever your starting point, a qualification for tutors has to be the next step. Enrol today at qualifiedtutor.org/training.
I want to just look at the book that you've written a little bit more, because this, it's important once you've written a book to tell people about it and to promote it. That's why we
Thank you.
So I wanted to know, so who is it? The book is titled I Wish I'd Known. Who is it kind of targeted at? Is it targeted at educators or at parents or at children, kind of young people themselves?
Well, it's targeted at parents, but actually we've heard from so many teachers and schools who are saying this should be on the PSHE curriculum for teachers. Because it covers so many of the issues that are relevant to the young people that educators are working with as well. And in fact, I'm at the moment writing a set of supplementary materials to go with the book as well. So one which will be available from the publisher's website. They'll just be available digitally. They're not going to be printed, but they kind of support and extend the book. So the first set of those is for parents and professionals working with young people with various neurodiverse conditions, primarily ADHD, autism, conduct disorder, but mainly those first two. And that's prompted by so many parents and special schools, actually, and teachers contacting us, concerned about how they come about that differently, and recognising there are different sorts of risks for these young people. And a second set, which is for mainstream schools and people working with young people in an educational context. So that includes stuff around drug education, writing a good drug policy, but also kind of how you can build a lot of the kind of issues and important pieces of information and advice in the book into cross-curricular delivery, for example, or extracurricular delivery, and those conversations, informal and formal, that you can have with young people that you're around.
Well, yeah. So as I said, the link to the book will be in the show notes below. But I think the scope, the applicability of this book to various kind of the various parties of a student's education, the parents, the educators, the schools. I think that's really what will help to make it such a kind of successful book. And one marker of that would certainly being part of the PSHE national curriculum. That would be an amazing step for the book. So yeah, it's really kind of the primary place for parents and teachers to understand more about this area, and also for tutors.
Absolutely.
I spoke about this just before. I mean, this being the Qualified Tutor podcast, we many of our listeners are, of course, tutors themselves. So I was wondering, Fiona, if you had some insights into how tutors are able to approach this area of PSHE and kind of drugs and alcohol, and how tutors might be involved in this conversation.
I think there's I'm ashamed to say that I hadn't thought about it before I was preparing for this podcast, because I've worked in and around education and with kind of alongside tutors in various roles for many years, but I just hadn't thought about a really important role that tutors could play in terms of young people and drugs and decisions, which is what we're all about. Not only are there cross-curricular opportunities to embed information about drugs and alcohol into pretty much anything that you're teaching, and the supplementary materials, one of the things I've done is kind of put in some examples and ideas for things you can do. So there's kind of ways of building in kind of direct instruction, if you like, into the other stuff that you're doing as tutors. But there's the element of, traditionally, and I know it's not the case anymore at all, especially after COVID, but traditionally tutors have often been busiest at those transition times. So helping kids prepare for the 11 plus or SATs or GCSEs or A levels. And those are the most vulnerable times for young people, particularly actually the move into sixth form, and even more so the move to university in terms of drugs and alcohol, because of all the kind of social shifts and changes and that different exposure to a different social environment, which can involve drugs, and finding out how you make your space and identity in your adolescence, which is so difficult in that new space. So supporting the young people that you're working with to manage that transition safely as well. And I know that's not what you're being paid to do, but nevertheless, you will inevitably, I know, end up doing all sorts of extracurricular bits and pieces as part of what you do in your relationship with the young people that you're working with. And I think that's the most important thing, is that relationship. And I love the phrase you used before, actually, Luda. I don't know if it's a standard phrase in tutoring, but that learning relationship, I thought that was a brilliant phrase, because actually every relationship that anybody that's doing any sort of education with anyone, it is a learning relationship. The relationship is absolutely key to whether somebody does or doesn't learn something. But in tutoring, you've got such a special and unique position in a young person's life. Unlike anybody else, you've got generally speaking, I know some people might be doing small group work, but generally speaking, it's one-to-one. You've got that focused time, however frequently, and a trusted relationship, because it wouldn't work if it wasn't a trusted relationship. So all that in terms of there's stuff explicitly about drugs and alcohol, and making sure that as a tutor you're up to date. And that's where I'm not to pitch for my book again, because you've done a brilliant pitch for my book, thank you. But there's so much jammed into that. That's all about what is it that's around for young people now? What is it that they're making decisions about? What are those different dimensions of risk that they're having to cope with that makes it complicated? That adolescent brain stuff that makes managing risk and decision making so hard. What can make communication difficult for teenagers? Or again, issues with mentalizing and interpreting facial expressions and all those kind of the hormones that can make things act in the moment. Again, to do with that neurological process as well. But all of that stuff, which is so keeping informed and aware yourself as an individual tutor within that relationship that you've got, so that you've got things to bring to it, but also lots and lots of listening and everything that you can do as a tutor to build all those protective factors across so many that can help young people across so many areas of risk. And specifically, obviously my heart is in terms of drugs and alcohol, but everything overlaps for young people. But everything about building confidence and self-esteem, that can be incredibly protective for young people in terms of those decision-making situations, helping them develop good coping and problem-solving skills. All of that can help them in those moments of decision. When everyone's watching them, there's everyone around them, they've got to make a decision. If they've had that extra reinforcement of resilience that can come from all sorts of directions, but I think tutors are uniquely placed to build that in a way that it's much harder for a class teacher to do. And parents is a different relationship again. But I think tutors can play a really vital role.
Yeah, I think that's one area that makes tutors particularly important, is that they aren't a teacher and they aren't a parent. They are a trusted adult, but they haven't had years and years of nagging the child, and they haven't stood up in front of the child and bored the child with some curriculum topic teaching that they have because of the pressures from school boards and from exam boards and that kind of thing, which a teacher has to go through. A teacher has to teach what they need to teach for the curriculum, and they have to get through it by the end of the year, otherwise the students won't learn. So they're in that kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, as a parent who has to live the life of a parent and make sure the student is their child is on the straight and narrow and that kind of thing. So they're also caught between a rock and a hard place. Whereas a tutor is perhaps caught between a rock, but there's no hard place. So, there's the rock is that they are a trusted adult with responsibilities, but they're not bound by those other pressures that a teacher or a parent are under. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that they're in this slightly freer position where they have the time and the kind of the patience to build a relationship with the student, to not cover that topic in the last half an hour of the session if the student doesn't want to, and if in fact talk about the risks of alcohol, or the risks of the different drugs that there are that might be accessible to that student, or whatever it is which the teacher doesn't have time to, and which the child is not going to listen to their parent talking about, because that's mum and that's dad. I'm not going to listen to mum and dad
anyway.
Drugs and alcohol and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Also, another big difference. Sorry, I was only thought of it while you were talking, but a big difference between tutors and both parents and teachers is the whole kind of behaviour management discipline side, which can put so many barriers up for young people and so many defences. And I would imagine I don't know, but I would imagine it's unusual as a tutor in that one-to-one role to have to deal with too many behavioural issues in a very disciplinary. You'd be more cajoling and winning people over, I imagine, if there's anything needed, and it would be more to do with confidence and encouragement rather than having to impose a behaviour policy or impose sanctions because you said if they didn't do this, then this would be the consequence, or whatever. Yeah.
Or even having sanctions or punishments as a tutor. I mean, I've been a tutor for 6 years now. I don't have punishments. Do you know what I mean? I don't. That's not part of me as a tutor's repertoire. So exactly, it's not about punishment. It's about encouragement, and it's not about
a different relationship altogether. You haven't got that fear or that threat or whatever, and adolescents learn much better through carrot rather than stick. Absolutely. I'm not just in terms of their neurological development, but just in terms of that emotional, relational side of their lives, which is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. But I love that phrase. Adolescents learn better through carrot than stick.
Most of us do, to be honest. But
yeah, no, that's true. It's exactly. Only the people who came up with that phrase, probably. So we're just coming kind of towards the end here, but certainly not done yet, because there's one area that I really want to ask you about, which we kind of touched on implicitly there, which was this idea of a trusted adult. And in the book, you certainly mentioned the importance of a trusted adult to a student, so to a child, a young person's development. How do we remind educators of this responsibility, of this, of the fact that they are in a trusted adult position, whether they realise it or not?
What educators, as in tutors, or sort of anybody working with,
or teachers? Yeah.
You would hope that they would know that, but I know especially teachers can get so incredibly busy and have so many pressures on them. But they are absolutely, if you're working with young people, you have a responsibility not just for their learning, but also for their welfare and well-being. And ultimately, children and young people, and adults for that matter, will learn better if they feel safe and happy. And the adults around them are the ones that will help to nurture that. I mean, obviously, it's complicated because you're not the only adult in their lives, and there can be difficult things going on at home. But actually, for some young people, that space, either at school or possibly with a tutor, but that education space is where they feel safest. You know, if home isn't somewhere that feels safe or restful or consistent, you know, having a place that's stable, where there's a routine and a rhythm, and where they know there are adults that do care about them, that can be something that can mend harm. The relationships are the most healing dynamic in all of our lives. And educators are the second most important influence for young people. There's the government commissions a survey of schools every couple of years and asks lots of questions about smoking, drinking and drugs. This is in England, there's another survey in Scotland, but for 11 to 15-year-olds. And one of the questions they ask is, where would you go for useful information about drug use? And top of the list, which always surprises parents, is parents. But second on the list is teachers. And that may or may not surprise teachers, but they are the second most important. And of course, young people spend second most amount of their time, that doesn't sound very grammatical, but you know, the second biggest amount of time is spent in an educational setting. So that the teachers have and educators have an incredibly important role, not just in learning, but I mean, as anyone that works in education knows, learning isn't just, it's not hard times and facts and, you know, all that stuff. I mean, nobody would think that in a million years, but not necessarily think through the fact that what they're doing has the potential to enable young people to live full and free and fulfilled lives, way beyond anything that they've ever learned.
Yeah. It's you have to kind of pause and take a moment to reflect on that, don't you? Because goes right to the root of why we educate young people, doesn't it? Why does school exist? What else can school achieve other than teaching students to pass grades, which it seems to be, the most important thing about school in today's society, rightly or wrongly. And actually, tutors, just as much as teachers and the people who make education system decisions higher up in government and the Department of Education, just like all of those people, tutors have to think about why they're doing what they're doing and what the end results are. And the end results are not solely that their student passes their exam or that they get paid their £30 an hour. The end result has to be a high level piece of thinking, doesn't it? And if that can be done in conjunction with the parent and the school, then everyone wins. No one benefits from parent, teacher, tutor being out of sync. And that's what has been the case largely in the past 10, 15 years of tutoring, is that certainly tutors don't speak to the teachers don't speak to other tutors, and sometimes tutors don't even speak to the parents regularly after the initial contact, which I find mind-boggling. But you've really helped me to think about things differently, Fiona, and hopefully the vice versa as well. And maybe I'm giving myself too much praise there, but
no, definitely, because actually it wasn't, as I said, we were saying this beforehand, I just said it on the podcast as well, admitted my shame that I hadn't thought through the role that tutors could play in terms of young people and drugs and decisions. And I would be really interested to hear what would be useful, if anything, from us in terms of resourcing or supporting tutors in their role. What are the things that resources we could create, or a space that we could provide, or training that we could offer? What is there anything that we could do if anybody felt that this would be a valuable addition to a valuable dimension to their role?
Well, that's a brilliant way to finish, Fiona. And actually, it's not often that we do something like this, but if you're listening to this podcast and you can see, or you would like to see, a way that the Daniel Spargo-Mabbs Foundation, who run workshops on drugs and alcohol and decision-making in children, could collaborate, could work with tutors, could provide resources or workshops for tutors, then email your thoughts to ludo@qualifiedtutor.org. That's me. And we will collate those responses, and Fiona and I will share those responses with Fiona, and we can see what the conversation will look like there, because we know that there is a conversation there and there is scope for collaboration between tutors and those working in the kind of decisions and young people field. There's definitely work to be done there because schools can't do it all by themselves. So, who knows, perhaps in 6 months, a year's time, that there'll be a collaborative workshop series, training series between the DSM Foundation and QT, because that's the strengths of both of these organisations. And I guess it's up to you, the tutor base, the tutor network in this country or beyond, abroad, to bring those ideas to life, or to at least suggest those ideas. So that's what we're leaving you with today. Is if you have any thoughts on this conversation we've had, or anything that's triggered thoughts in your mind about what the potential for collaboration could be, then email ludo@qualifiedtutor.org, and we will listen to what you have to say. But thank you very, very much, Fiona, for joining us. That was very in-depth and very thought-provoking, which is what every podcast episode should be. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been lovely to have the opportunity to talk to all your tutors and to you.
Yeah, well, and let this not be the first time. You can find us in the qualifiedtutorcommunity.org. That's both listeners and also Fiona yourself. And there's a 1,300 strong community of tutors discussing all kinds of things every single day on there. So that's a great place to start. But also visit the DSM Foundation .org.uk website to learn more about what Fiona and her team are doing. So that'll be in the show notes below. But until next time, everyone, Thank you very much. Have a great August, and we'll see you again for the next episode. Thanks, Fiona.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Qualified Tutor podcast, where tutors share their expertise to support the tutoring community. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes below. We exist to connect, share, and learn with you because tutoring is a small job that makes a big difference.